Can you please state your name and date of birth?
I'm Tom Sewell. I was born December 14th, 1939. Well, I had an art gallery in Minneapolis when I was 23. And I lost my lease, and I met a girl who I'd gone to high school with, and we decided to drive to California together. So I had an old VW pickup, and we drove across the country from Minneapolis to California to visit my best friend from high school named Michael Blodgett, who lived in Hollywood. And we visited him for a few days, and then someone by the name of Jack Tabor told us that there were lots of places for artists to rent in Venice. So we drove down Venice Boulevard from Hollywood and hit Pacific, took a left, went to the end of the Marina Peninsula, and turned right and came up Speedway. And there was a house for rent on Ironsides. So we rented the house. It seemed like a lot of money at the time. It's probably about $65 a month. And it was right on the beach. And we set up shop, and that's when the whole Venice experience kicked in for me. We go down for breakfast at the Driftwood Cafe on the boardwalk. A guy named Jorgen and his sister Crystal had this restaurant, the Driftwood. And we'd go there every morning for breakfast, and the place was crawling with artists and lifeguards and really interesting people. You'd see Billy Al Bankston, you'd see Ed Moses, Sam Francis, you'd see Thunberg, you'd see, all the different artists would go there. And then I also started photographing all the different people, all the different buildings. Coming from Minneapolis to see Los Angeles at that time was pretty thrilling for me. The neon in the city, the pop architecture, the buildings shaped like hot dogs and donuts and shoes, the freeways. I just started photographing everything because I was just amazed at what I was looking at. I liked the whole idea of this city by the sea, and it was kind of goofy in a way, and it had some Italian roots. The colonnades, the architecture on Windward and so forth really fascinated me. We were starting to do art happenings on the beach. And the people from the Eames office, Charles Eames' office, would come down. Paolo Soleri would come with his group of people. People from England, Archeogram, Warren Chalk. A lot of interesting people came to visit us. So it was a very lively situation. Shortly after that, I got a job as an art director for a television show. My friend Michael Blodgett had a show called The Michael Blodgett Show, and they hired me as the art director. So I'd come down to Market Street to Dwayne Valentine's studio, and I'd rent a truck. I'd bring his sculptures up to Hollywood and use them as the sets of this TV show. Today, the same sculptures are in the Museum of Modern Art in New York. So it was really an interesting time. You had Valentine, you had Larry Bell, you had Irwin. You had a lot of different people on Market Street, and that was fun. Architects also, Stephen Ehrlich had an office there. Bob Graham eventually had an office there. So I made use out of a lot of artists' studio space and art to bring up to Hollywood to use in my TV show. My friend Michael Hernandez comes to me and says, "Tom, there's a building for sale on West Washington Boulevard." That's what's now Abbott Kinney. So I went over and I looked at it. It was a 2-story old grocery store, quite large, sitting on the corner of Andalusia in West Washington, across from Intelligentsia now. My friend Roger Webster had seen what I had done with my warehouses, where I was cutting them up and leasing them to people. And he saw some of the photos I was doing. He says, "You know, if you ever want to go in business or want to have a partner, I'd be happy to partner with you." So I called him, and we went over and we looked at this building. And it was a magnificent brick building. And we were able to buy this building. And at that time, there was no retail business on what's now Abbott Kinney. It was just a kind of an empty street. Just boarded up buildings and houses. And one artist studio way at the end, Freddie Eversley, was down there. And there was a glass company, but no real retail. And we decided to do what we called the supermarket. I leased space to a lot of different local vendors, people that were selling things. We had a woodworker, we had a weaver, we had a painter, we had a guy who wanted to set up a little shop and encourage people to vote. And we created this kind of a scene on West Washington. And eventually we got the name changed to Abbot Kinney, because I went through a depression for a while when a girlfriend and I broke up. And a fellow named Doug Trumbull, who's a filmmaker who just died, very nice man, lent me a camera, a 16 millimeter camera, and I shot a documentary film on the history of Venice. And I got to know about Abbot Kinney. My friend Tom Moran wrote the script. And we made this little 16 millimeter film. My friend Brad Kay, still lives in Venice on Superba, is a genius with music. He's a specialist in 20s, 30s, 40s music. He's got thousands of LPs, of 78s. He did the music for it. So we made this little film on Venice, California. I really kind of related to Abbot Kinney. And I thought it was a really good idea to rename this street after him, because there was another Washington Boulevard, and it got kind of confusing. So we sort of started this whole scene on Abbot Kinney with this supermarket. But then, one day, it was a full moon, I'm walking on the beach, 3 a.m, I walk up to Windward, and I walk down Windward to Pacific, and there on the corner of Windward and Pacific is this arched buildings with the colonnades. And there's a sign on the building that says "For Sale." And inside the building is a laundromat, washing machines and dryers in it. So I called the number on the sign. The guy named Lee Ford was the broker selling it. And he met me down at the building, and I said, what's the price on it? He told me, I forget what it was, over 100,000. And I said, Lee, I'll give you $65,000 for the building. I don't know where I was going to come up with the money, but I just dreaming. And he laughed. He said, no. I said, keep my number. Well, as luck would have it, 2 years later, he called me back. He says, you got it. I called Roger. I said, you want to go in on this? He didn't know for sure. I said, well, I'm going to buy it with or without you. He says, fine. He said he'd go in on it with me. So we bought the building. And on a weekend when he was down in Mexico surfing, I decided to move the whole bunch of my people that had rented space on West Washington Boulevard over to Windward. And we set up what I called the Venice Flea Market. I painted a big graphic on the building. I put neon on the arches and painted the building in fun colors. And it became the sort of the center of Venice, the commercial center, and the sort of the soul of Venice right on that corner. It was very, very interesting time. The week before we opened, I'd met a group called the Mystic Knights of the Oingo Boingo. And there were roller derby dykes, there were gorillas on skates, there were all these different people. And the Oingo Boingo had just come from France. They'd been performing on the streets of France. And the main guy was Rick Elfman. And this was before his brother Danny joined him. And all of a sudden, this group started to play, and I was amazed at it. Funny little white tuxedos and fezzes and funny hats. So I got to know them. I invited them to come to Venice to play at the opening of our flea market. So there they showed up. And of course, there were also a lot of protesters. Protesters came out in mass when we opened the flea market, shouting at us,
Why were they
gentrifiers, developers. They thought, there's people with balloons protesting in front that says, Sewell sucks and Webster maybe. I'm Tom Sewell, my partner was Roger Webster, so we're Sewell and Webster. We were having a ball at the Venice flea market. And then my girlfriend at the time, Elizabeth Freeman, I was back in town, in Minneapolis visiting my family. Elizabeth Freeman says, "Tom, you've got to come back and buy the St. Charles Hotel." At that time, it was a really rundown, decrepit, derelict hotel. It was for sale, and it had been for sale for years. Nobody wanted it. So finally, my girlfriend says, "You've got to come back and buy it." So I came back, and somehow Roger and I were able to pony up the money. And I went in, and from top to bottom, took the building back to the basic brick, put in, sanded the floors, put in graphics, and fixed up the bar in the base and on the main floor, and had this fabulous building right on the ocean. And I leased it to architects, designers, screenwriters. Actually, the movie Blade Runner was written there. So we had the building on the beach, and I had an office there. Unique McPeak, the tightrope walker, set up a tightrope line from our building to Environmental Communications, which was at 62 Windward. Now, in EC, Environmental Communications was a really interesting group in Venice in the 70s. It was a group of photographers, artists, filmmakers, and we all had a certain love of the city, of the West Coast. And we're renting dirigibles and shooting the city from a dirigible. We're driving the freeways and filming the freeways. And I'm shooting the neon signs and the pop architecture and the billboards. It was a very lively group. So we had the hotel on one side of the street and Environmental Communications on the other side, with Roger Webster, Ted Tanaka, Bernard Perloff, George Van Oy, Gary Greenberg, David Greenberg, major player. Then we got the Ant Farm people that did Cadillac Ranch. We got all sorts of other groups involved. So the street became really fabulous. Bob Irwin was putting up scrims, dealing with light. Larry Bell hired a friend of mine, Mike McHugh, to help him create a huge machine the size of a big automobile with a big door on it. And he'd be able to put glass in there and vaporize something and put on the glass. So there's Larry Bell over there on Market Street working with his amazing machine, making these giant glass boxes and things. People coming from all over, even Marcel Duchamp came to visit Larry Bell at his studio. One of the things I liked best were my involvement with the architects. You've got a building like this by David Hertz, who did amazing things in Venice. I met him when he was just a young guy. He was designing concrete furniture, and he went on to design unbelievable things. Frank Gehry had his studio down here on the boardwalk, and I'd stop in and I'd see Frank, and I'd walk into his office, and there he's standing there with this model of what became the Chiat Day building, with fabulous building with binoculars in front of it. And what he had done is just taken some binoculars. Klaus Oldenburg was with him. Takes the binoculars and sets it in front of the building, and they designed that into the structure. I mean, things like that were happening. Gary Hertz, Fred Fisher, building the Pink House for LPC, Lauren Paul Kaplan, on San Juan Avenue. Extremely important event. Architecturally. Restaurants are another big part of Venice, really a big part. Where the Driftwood was, that I liked so much back in the late 60s, where the artists and the lifeguards would meet in the morning, that became Robert's restaurant. Two guys, Hal and Robert, opened his restaurant. It was the first 100% cotton napkins and tablecloths, pink, great lighting, a jukebox playing Billie Holiday and all these great tunes. And it just became this magnet for interesting people. So there was Roberts, later Hal's on West Washington. Of course, 72 Market Street, Tony Bill creating 72 Market Street was one of the most magic things that happened to Venice. First of all, the place was beautifully designed. Robert Graham, I think Tom Main was responsible for most of the design. The building looked great, big sliding door right on the sidewalk, so you could go in and sit down and have lunch. The door is wide open. You know, the whole wall is open. You can see the surfers walking by and the people. You see Valentine across the street and Bell and whoever, Andy Summers from the police. 72 Market Street, somehow, it was like spark for a fire. Magic happened in those days. And then the dinners, you'd walk in and there's at one table you've got Frank Gehry, another table you've got, you know, some art collector, and you've got Broad, Eli Broad over here, and you've got Valentine having lunch, you've got Hopper over in the corner. I mean, it's like, you could do a painting of it, you know. It was magic. So restaurants became, you know, up and down the street became a really important draw and cultural significance. I wanted to preserve what we could. The buildings that we were buying were historic buildings. They were very interesting buildings. I wanted to save them. A lot of them are getting torn down. And I felt it was important to save them. So everything we bought had some kind of historic value. And we turned it into something that was more valuable than what it was. Most of them were derelict buildings. So Roger and I ended up buying quite a few buildings and restoring them, fixing them up. I love finding value where there is none. I love creating beauty where there is none. And we're still in business. We still have a design center on Main Street.
Do you have one that you found that's a favorite, or a couple that like really stand out that like you were?
Well, the St. Charles Hotel was
on Windward.
Fabulous. I mean, I have photographs of what we did in there. Yes, that was an Abbott Kinney building. So was the flea market on Windward and Pacific. Original Abbott Kinney buildings in the Italian architecture, classical, columns, capitals, arches. I didn't want to see those buildings get torn down.
Do you think you would be a different artist having spent those formative years at forming your art here, living in Venice, versus if you were in Minnesota or somewhere else?
Absolutely.
So talk to me about how Venice has a place.
Absolutely, I'd be a different artist. I mean, when I saw what everyone was doing, and I saw people like, you know, Doug Christmas, the dealer, and I saw people like Tom Main making art as well as architecture. Ron Cooper, I saw Larry Bell, who's still producing fantastic art at age 82. When I saw what they were doing, I mean, it rubs off on you. You know, you can't help but feel inspired. And the magazine people come down, and the book people come down, and the performers, Philip Glass, and all the people that pass through Venice leave something. They leave something tangible. Much more so here than any place else.